Now, the Three Martini Lunch with Greg Corombos and Jim Geraghty.
And welcome, everyone, to the Monday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. Along with Jim Geraghty of National Review, I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks so much for being with us today for the final installment of our year-end 2018 Three Martini Lunch Awards. The Crystal Martini glasses going out 3 more times here with, some would say arguably, our most prestigious awards of all. Today we'll be talking about our respective Persons of the Year, our Turncoats of the Year, and our fearless predictions for 2019. So first of all, Happy New Year's Eve to everyone. Jim, Happy New Year's Eve to you. And let's get on to the most prestigious award of all. Who is your Person of the Year?
You know, Greg, I strongly contemplated giving this to someone I've mentioned earlier in these awards, incoming Congressman Dan Crenshaw. But I only called him, rising star, and so I didn't want to double up here. So I decided to go with somebody else who probably, I know we've talked about in previous days, and it's not merely for the awesome nickname he got this year. Let's face it, 2018 was the year of Cocaine Mitch. Mitch McConnell started the year Senate Majority Leader and probably one of the 3 most powerful people in Washington. I think you can make the argument that he's even more powerful as 2018 comes to a close. He got the Brett Kavanaugh nomination through and kept all of his caucus together except one. I don't think you can say that was an easy task. Obviously, he has a slightly bigger cushion heading into the new Senate. We're getting close to about 100 appellate and district court judge confirmations through the U.S. Senate. That's a record pace, and it's very clear what is one of the biggest, I think you might argue one of the few really unifying goals for the conservative movement, Republican Party. Foreign policy, social policy, economic policy. The party's going through some big changes. There isn't the same consensus on trade the way there used to be. There's not at the same, certainly very little appetite for entitlement reform, certainly very little appetite for making serious cuts in the budget and spending. And you and I have pointed out how bad that is. But, there is unity over judicial confirmations and the importance of good, strict constructionist, originalist, good judges, however you want to characterize them. And it's just been going gangbusters on this front. As we saw with criminal justice reform, I think you can make the argument that despite, the power of the presidency, Mitch McConnell is really the one who decides what passes the Senate and what ultimately becomes law. And obviously in the coming year, I think it's very likely Democrats will push for impeachment. And my sneaking suspicion is that you will see Mitch McConnell become an even more important figure. Look, if he's the guy who has to make sure that it's not terribly likely that Democrats would get, or that foes of the president would get 67 votes in the Senate. But I'm sure, Trump might prefer that it never comes to the floor. So, he's very much got a great deal of leverage in the White House, leverage with everything else. And of course, he gets to spend a lot of time probably voting down or just simply rejecting legislation that passes the Nancy Pelosi controlled House. So it's Cocaine Mitch's world. We just live in it.
Excellent choice. Yeah, he was on my short list. Remember a couple of weeks ago when Time Magazine came out with their short list of 10, and I said nobody that I'm considering is on this list, and Mitch McConnell was certainly one of them. I almost went with Nancy Pelosi. As disgraceful as her clutch on power is, it's also kind of impressive in some ways, because usually when people stop being speaker, they kind of fade off into oblivion, but not Nancy Pelosi, and she managed to beat off the young insurgents like people chasing squirrels off their lawn with this ridiculous term limit deal that's not going to affect her at all. But not my choice ultimately. My choice is also in the U.S. Senate, but it's Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman Chuck Grassley. Because Chuck Grassley obviously played a critical role in addition to Mitch McConnell in getting all those judicial nominations out of committee and to the floor, especially the appellate, as well as many district court nominations. But where he really shined this year, I think, was in the Kavanaugh hearings. He did a great job even before the Christine Ford allegations came out of being fair but not letting folks like Cory Booker and Kamala Harris just run everything off the rails with their crazy insistence that there hadn't been enough documents shared when there were way more documents shared by Brett Kavanaugh than any other Supreme Court nominee. So he gave them their time to vent and make fools out of themselves, but ultimately he kept it on the rails. And then when the Ford allegations came out, he could have done a couple different things. He could have freaked out and said, this is not worth the fight. He could have just ignored the whole thing and looked terrible like he was not with the times. Instead, he and his diligent staff made every effort to get the statement of Christine Ford. They even offered to go out to California to get it so she wouldn't have to travel because, remember, she was supposedly afraid of flying. And at the same time, she didn't want to be speaking in public, according to her letter to Dianne Feinstein. And so they offered every which way to get her testimony that made her most comfortable. ultimately her legal team either didn't tell her or scammed the whole thing to make sure she got to testify in public. And so when she wanted more time, Grassley gave her more time, but not too much time because the Democrats really wanted to play this out as long as humanly possible. So he was fair to all sides. He was tough in cracking down on those that I mentioned just the other day who came up with the ludicrous allegations and referring those to the Justice Department. So in a very difficult, complex, high-stakes, very emotional situation, Chuck Grassley's leadership kept everything together and ultimately got Brett Kavanaugh across the finish line. And I think a process that everyone has to say was run about as well as it could have been under the circumstances.
That's another great selection. And look, there are a lot of ways in which 2018 was a disappointing year for conservatives, particularly losing the House of Representatives. But if the story of the year is, I'm sorry, in terms of the really long-term consequences, it's very likely we're going to be talking about the impact of these judicial nominations, not just the Supreme Court, but throughout the federal judiciary for many years. And so here we are. For as frustrating as the Trump era may be for some conservatives, the upside may be quite considerable in terms of policy fights for many years to come.
No, that's a good point. And not only is it important that Kavanaugh got through, far more important is that Republicans, led by Grassley, led by McConnell, led by others on the committee, stood up for due process and a process of actually examining the evidence where the Democrats were all out there screaming, believe the accuser, no matter how detailed or non-detailed or corroborated or non-corroborated the story was. And I think that might end up being a far bigger deal than anything that actually happened with that specific confirmation. Let's move on to the Turncoat of the year. No one wants to win this one, but someone's going to. Jim, who do you have?
I'm going to cheat a little bit. I'm going to say a group. Well, there's really two folks in particular. I'm going to say I don't want to say, when I say never Trump Republicans, I don't mean every never Trump person from the 2016 campaign. A bunch of my colleagues here at National Review felt that way. I applied that label to myself. I did not vote for Trump. I don't know how I'm going to vote in 2020. I think it's, the Democrats earning my vote would require them to basically become a completely different party. So, and if you gave me a choice between John Kasich and Donald Trump right now, I'd pick Trump just to stick it to Kasich for the way that he stayed in the campaign in 2016. So I'm going to go with Max Boot and Jen Rubin, and you can kind of extend it. Bill Kristol is probably one step removed from that, but even he started arguing the previous year that Ed Gillespie was too much of a Trumpite and that he had to be defeated in the Virginia governor's race. And my attitude is that when Ed Gillespie is too scary for you, when he's too extremist, when he's too far and frothing at the mouth, I'm pretty sure I've been in events where both Bill Kristol and Ed Gillespie have been in the room. And in fact, there's not, at least the old Bill Kristol, there wasn't that much of a difference there. Boot wrote a whole book about this, and the whole gist of the book was, oh my God, I never knew what conservatives stood for. I've been on the wrong side the whole time, which this is one of those books that ends up being more revealing than perhaps the author intended. And he's, I will give him credit, though. I mean, we all remember that infamous tweet where he argued that his book was being ignored. I, too, feel like my books have been ignored, and we'll be doing long sections of this in the coming year about how more people need to talk about my books. Then, of course, Charlie Cook wrote a critical piece of it, and then he said, God, they're obsessed with me. Heads I win, tails you lose. People who listen to this podcast know I have a lot of beefs with Trump. And my suspicion is that since the election didn't go as well as he hoped, going to be dealing with the Democratic House, subpoenas are coming in. As of this recording, didn't get the wall funding that he wanted. A lot of frustrations and setbacks, and I think Trump is probably going to get worse before he gets better. Both, I think with the conditions of his presidency, and I think the way he deals with those conditions are going to get worse before they get better. But all of my frustration with this has not made me say, I hate the Federalist Society now, which is pretty much what Jen Rubin wrote. It hasn't made me say, moving the embassy to Jerusalem is a terrible move. Well, actually, no, it's another thing that Jen Rubin liked when before Trump did it, and then once Trump did it, she said it was a terrible, reckless move. Yada, yada, yada. I don't think you should suddenly flip on policies that because of the rise of one particular figure. I don't understand that. I think it indicates a certain look. If you want to argue Trump is a cult of personality, I think there's when you start seeing the people who so you see some of those signs at some of those rallies. Yeah, maybe remember we all made fun of Obama being the Messiah and how silly the Democrats were in 2007 and 2008. We'd never do anything like that. Apparently, some of us are willing to do stuff like that. But the point is that there are some people who've been the opposite of that. And that if, Trump does something that they really like, or it takes a position they always agreed with, well, then it must be wrong. And to me, this is, that's as dumb as blindly disagreeing with everybody with a particular figure is every bit as dumb as blindly following somebody. So deeply frustrated and disappointed. I don't think it's I guess some people say it's not enormously shocking, but again, I don't know how much that adds value to the realm of public discourse when you automatically oppose a leader for everything they do, regardless of the merits. So, again, to folks who once consider themselves conservatives, and as I'm, observed a little while ago, Greg, don't forget, Jen Rubin back in the 2007-2008 presidential primary, she was a huge Rudy Giuliani fan. Huge. Not singing that tune anymore these days.
No, yeah. She's, or at least was until very recently, the conservative Washington Post columnist, and nobody could figure out anymore what was actually conservative that she stood for. I mean, the last vestige of that was pro-Israel, and then she opposed the moving of the embassy to Jerusalem. Yeah, this is my choice as well, because I could probably dig for others, but this was so blatant and so frustrating this year. The only thing I'm really going to do is add more names to the pile. I had Bill Kristol, Jen Rubin, Joe Scarborough over at Morning Joe, Charlie Sykes, Rick Wilson, Steve Schmidt, Nicole Wallace. I'm not even sure she really considers herself a Republican or a conservative anymore. And obviously, Max Boot. And the coup de grace on all this for me was when they actually encourage people to go out and vote for Democrats in the midterm elections, most of these people, because that was the only way to really hold Trump accountable. And that was the only thing that mattered. It didn't matter what you thought about policy, about the Constitution, about free speech, about freedom of religion, about the Second Amendment, how you wanted the economy structured. None of that mattered. Trump is just an all-encompassing obsession for these people. And now they're going to be gleeful as Jerry Nadler and Elijah Cummings and Adam Schiff and all these people finally get their chance on the House side to gum up the works and create a whole bunch of problems for Trump, some of it warranted, some of it probably excessive in the next couple of years. And these people, some of them say they do it on principle, which it's hard to see how they're doing that when they literally oppose policies because Trump supports them when they spent decades and decades supporting them. And also, people are getting rich now because people know who they are. I'm not even sure I knew who Max Boot was before Trump started running for president. I definitely didn't know who Rick Wilson or Charlie Sykes were. And maybe that says more about me than them. But these people who claim that their lives are really being oppressed because of Trump sure are making a whole lot of money off of Trump, even though they hate him. And here's what I think is a great contrast. David French of National Review. I don't think there's any never-Trumper who took more vitriol, more hatred, more scorn from pro-Trump people. And David is definitely never Trump. I don't think it's going out too far to say that he will not be voting for Donald Trump in 2020. But when Trump endorses a policy that upholds a conservative principle, David is there to say, attaboy, I agree on this one. And then Trump will tweet something or do something that'll make his blood boil again. But he's intellectually honest. And that is the distinction that I think you and he and a lot of other folks who are originally part of Never Trump can do with a clean conscience that these other people, for whatever reason, whether it's personal or professional, that they think it benefits them, simply can't do or won't do.
I was going to say, first of all, I agree with everything you said there, Greg. And, you and I try very hard not to have the same picks in this. For listeners wondering, we don't really coordinate them, but usually we have like one or two. And, Greg's kind enough to let me go first so that he has to go with his second choice if necessary. But I was going to observe, I think it makes sense that you and I would align on this one because I don't think the category Turncoat of the Year was pretty much made for folks like this. Yes. When it's not merely, I changed my mind, or even the traditional political flip-flopper. No, this is, I renounced everything I spent the past years of my career standing for, which is not something you see in politics, and I don't think you should see in politics. I think it indicates a certain amount of intellectual dishonesty if you're willing to flip that quickly, that intensely, and all of that. So anyway, we're almost done with this, right, Greg?
Yes, we only have one more. I did come up with one more name, though. The favorite person you've ever voted for, Evan McMullen, also has decided that anything Trump supports has got to go down. So anyway.
Turncoat of the Year, I'm fairly certain the White House would scream, Michael Cohen!
That would be Trump's pick. No doubt. No doubt. All right, so the awards are done. Let's move on to predictions. And Jim, I must say out front that I was far too aggressive last year, and you were spot on. You said that the Democrats would win the House, which was correct. I said that they would win both, which was clearly not correct, because I said the Mueller report would be done just before Labor Day, and that what he said would be so damaging to Trump or critical of Trump that it would cost Republicans the Senate as well. Clearly that didn't happen. So congratulations on being more accurate than me last year. What is your prediction for 2019?
So I could have gone with, the House Democrats will attempt to impeach the president. I don't think that's terribly bold or exciting. I think it's, and despite the fact that a couple of the leaders try to downplay it, it's pretty clear the grassroots are yearning for it. I could also say a Republican Senate is not going to will not impeach Trump, but I think even that doesn't, there's nothing particularly bold or exciting or something like that. So I'm going to instead get depressing, Greg. And I will argue that things with this presidency will get worse before they get better. And I don't say this with any particular glee or excitement. I would prefer that a successful President Trump was enacting conservative ideas and conservative policies and things like that. I think it is very clear that this is a president who believed he was stepping into a position where he could say, we should do X, and other people would figure out how to do X for him. He's been calling for, funding for the wall on Twitter every couple of, weeks. Congress must pass. Well, Congress doesn't. And in fact, the one time they did introduce legislation that was pretty much what the president wanted, it not only didn't pass the Senate, it didn't pass the House. I think that's like 130 votes or something like that. Even there are a bunch of Republicans who didn't like the legislation that the White House preferred. I think this is, Trump will get more frustrated in office. I think his schedule will have more quote unquote executive time, which tends to be schmoozing on the phone and sometimes watching cable news and tweeting out his angry responses to it. This is not the president at his best. The president has had some good moments. I think the president has had some, his States of the Union have generally been laid out a good vision. I think there continues to be this misunderstanding of what the president is supposed to do, that ultimately the presidency is not about being good on cable news. At the end of the day, cable news is not really that important to how the laws get set. Yes, there's a messaging component of it all. And I know that, there are a lot of conservatives like, we got to fight the media, and Colin Kaepernick, we got to, those NFL, getting sucked into every culture war fight and all that kind of stuff. Look, at the end of the day, conservatism, or at least a good portion of the governing part of conservatism, comes down to policies, like what laws are in the books and what does the government do? What does the government spend money on? How much money does the government collect? All of that. And I think that this is, we've had ultimately, I'm not sure the good chunk of the conservative base is all that interested in governing. Governing is not inherently exciting or interesting or fun to watch. It can often be quite boring. It requires, keeping up with the details. It involves homework, so to speak. And that's, not what people, that doesn't make for good cable news segments. The president is fantastic for cable news segments, and I get invited on every now and then to go to join in the circus. I think the 2019 will bring more circus, and I think it'll be deeply frustrating for conservatives. Obviously, without the House, we're not going to have a very tough time getting anything passed. Anything that does get passed is probably going to require some significant concessions. And even with that possibility, I don't think you're going to see anything happen. You ever say, well, maybe Trump and Democrats will work together to pass an infrastructure bill. Look, the entire Democratic messaging is that Trump is the devil, right? I mean, he is Satan. He is evil. He is destroying our democracy. He's a fascist. He's a Putin puppet, misogynist. He's racist. He's xenophobic, all that kind of stuff. You can't say this guy is the most evil person on earth and then say, but don't worry, we worked out a plan for roads and bridges with him. It's just not going to happen. House Democrats don't really want to reach a deal with the president. They want to get rid of the president. So I think 2019 is going to be an ugly political year. Maybe the interesting question will be here's my more creative and exciting prediction. And you notice how this is wandering and meandering like a river, Greg. We will begin the year with something in the neighborhood of 20 announced or all but announced Democrats running for president. By the end of 2019, more than half of them will have been it'll be very clear that they're just in it for the book deal, and who are hoping for a cabinet post at some point. And by the end of the year, there'll be a whole bunch of Tom Vilsack. Tom Vilsack, announced he was running for president in January 2017, and he announced he was quitting. He's running for president in March of 2007, and he quit before March 2007. about a 2-month campaign, when it was very clear that no, he wasn't able to raise money, and nobody was all that interested in, a Tom Vilsack presidency. I think you'll have a bunch of those, Greg.
I was so bold in last year. I really want to make my new prediction that nothing's going to happen in 2019, but I'm gonna characterize that more specifically, and that's that nothing of consequence legislatively is going to get done because the Democrats in the House are going to be completely consumed with investigating Trump 10 ways from Sunday and everything from Trump organization to Trump inauguration to Trump administration to possible collusion and all sorts of other things. And on the Senate side, as Dan Foster has explained, while we've done a great job on judges and other appointments, the legislating over there gets pretty tough, even with 53. Getting to 60 on most vital pieces of legislation is going to be difficult. So Republicans will focus on confirmations. Democrats will focus on investigations. And if you were hoping that maybe there could be some sort of bipartisan agreement to stop your premiums and deductibles from skyrocketing, not going to happen. Everybody's posturing, like Jim said, for 2020. Anything that's going to make our lives better is probably going to have to wait until the next time there's total Republican control. I hope I'm wrong, because that could be a really, really long time from now. So I don't really want to wait that long. But we had our chance in the last 2 years, got some things done, didn't get nearly enough done, and now it's back to gridlock between the House and Senate. And who knows what's going to happen from 2020. I also think that Beto O'Rourke will run for president and be one of the people definitely in the mix by the end of the year.
Great choice there. I wish we had happier predictions there, Greg. But we don't. Enjoy. Happy New Year, everybody.
So, Jim, that does wrap up a very eventful year. As you said, sorry we couldn't end it on a more optimistic note for 2019. But hey, if my predictions are as wrong as they were this year, then maybe good things will happen. So have a wonderful New Year. Great start to 2019. We'll be off on New Year's Day, but back at it on Wednesday, January 2nd. So, Jim, Happy New Year, and see you next year.
See you next year, Greg.
Jim Geraghty of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks for being with us today and all throughout 2018. Happy New Year to one and all. Thanks for listening to the Three Martini Lunch, and join us again Wednesday for the next Three Martini Lunch.